Hello, is anybody here? You don't have to be afraid. I'm just here to talk with you. I am a seasoned paranormal investigator with a growing resume. I began investigating the paranormal when I was 16 years old, where I learned the tricks of the trade from a dear friend of mine. Since then, I've been a paranormal tour guide at the Ohio State Reformatory, have been on paranormal teams where I have investigated private homes, and have given presentations on real-life ghost busting. Now, I'm on a quest to explore all realms of the paranormal through expert interviews. I'm Sydney Miller, and this is Not Afraid.
Have you ever played with a Ouija board? Have you ever wondered who or what was actually communicating with you from the other side? Tonight, we hope to get those answers as we sit down with Darren Evans. Darren is a paranormal researcher from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He has been featured on several episodes of Ghost Adventures. Darren stars in the horror film I Am ZoZo, where he plays himself. He is also co-author of the book, The ZoZo Phenomenon.
Welcome to I'm Not Afraid of the Unknown, ZoZo, the Ouija Board Demon.
Darren, thank you for agreeing to talk with us tonight and share your experiences and knowledge of the ZoZo Demon.
Sure.
So, Darren,
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being on and agreeing to sit down with us. So, Darren, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. As she said, I'm just a paranormal researcher slash author from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Years ago, I began messing with boards in my teenage years, and my first board that I was ever on, what kind of started this whole thing as far as my involvement was way back in the early 80s when we discovered a double-sided board that was surrounded by preserved jars of blackbirds, which was pretty spooky back then. I didn't understand it. After that, I thought all boards had two sides to it. But this was a pretty menacing board, and that's where my sessions began with that board. And to think that 40 years later that it would that this phenomenon would be what it's become is pretty hard to fathom, kind of. And it's just a very strange phenomenon from start to finish. And but I'm a researcher from Tulsa, and I discovered this phenomenon, kind of exposed it to the world. And some people say I kind of created a monster, but that wasn't my intent. And so, but it gets pretty deep, and but basically this thing came through and identified itself, of course, as ZoZo. And then I found out years later that many other people were also having contact and strange experiences with this Z entity. So.
Now, can I stop you 1 second? You were talking about the double-sided board. That's something I've never seen ever. Was it like handmade, or is it just something? Is that how you came into contact with ZoZo? Or?
Yes, I believe so. It was double-sided. On one side was a old William Fuld talking board that was from the 60s. It had the square corners. I kind of have one laying around somewhere, but it's an older board. But it was the other side that was grafted to it, and it had someone had took the time to burn and etch on this board, and it was quite menacing, but it was also quite beautiful.
Wow.
And so so that was a pretty I hadn't seen one like it since. I don't know why, but again, I thought that all spirit boards were double-sided when I first started messing with them. But we were told not to mess with the board that was found underneath that house. But of course, being teenagers, we snuck it out and we began to have sessions with it, and some strange things began to happen.
Sure.
And I become quite obsessed with contact. I was the kind of guy that if you didn't believe in the spirit world, you could call me and I'd bring my earth, wind, and fire, my chalice and my board, and I'd come over and I'd just prove it to you. And very seldomly did I not convince people
Wow.
that the spirit world was indeed very real.
Wow. That's really amazing. So let's see. So I guess let me go back. So when you first started messing or playing with a Ouija board, who were you trying to communicate with? Was there a specific person that you were trying to communicate with, or?
Well, we like a lot of people do. We wanted to contact deceased loved ones and dead rock stars. And
yeah, for sure.
it wasn't, not every session that I've been involved with, was doom and gloom. We asked to speak. I remember getting on the board with one of my best friends at the time, who was a big AC/DC fan, and he was a big Bon Scott fan, the original lead singer of AC/DC. Well, we seemed to have he seemed to have dropped in one evening as we were requesting his presence, and suddenly, what was weird about that whole thing is suddenly its characteristics and its mannerisms began to communicate in an Australian dialect type of and its slang words and stuff, and it would spell things that there's no way that and it knew slang words from Australia that there's no way that I would have remembered, or my
Sure.
friend for that matter, even though we were fans of AC/DC.
Right.
So we were quite convinced that we were speaking to Bon Scott.
Wow.
But we would find out later that during some sessions, and again, this same guy, when he asked how he would die, it spelled car wreck at night, all alone, and that's exactly how he died a couple years later.
Wow.
That's awesome. I love some AC/DC. Yes, that's awesome.
We asked it during that same session one night. We asked it who he was going to marry, and it spelled an individual's name. And I said, "Well, do you have a phone number for that individual?" And it went to yes. And I said, "Well, spell the phone number." And we wrote down the phone number that it went across, and I actually dialed that number. This was before cell phones, and it was from a landline. And I dialed that number, and this woman answered the phone, and I said, "What's your name?" She repeated the same name that was given to us.
Wow.
So it's stuff like that would happen regularly that convinced me that I was dealing with the other side, and I become obsessed. I actually began to develop big shoulder muscles because I was always using my hands on the board at some point, but I didn't like to use it by myself, and so I went through a musical chair theater of people that I would do the board with all over the country when I used to travel. And so I'm not real pleased with that, but and some people become obsessed with these boards, and it can lead to, in my case, it led to a nervous breakdown, and some therapy and some exorcisms. I've had 2 exorcisms from 2 different organizations back then in the 90s, when I seem to have been attacked by this thing. And so when I found out later in the 90s, after the advent of the internet, when I found out that other people were experiencing this particular entity, it was like a breath of fresh air, but at the same time, it was like a gulp of disturbing. I knew that I wasn't crazy at that time. At least I didn't feel as crazy as I thought I would, because other people, it seemed to. Then when I went on a radio station and began to talk about this in 2009, it got the attention of John Zaffis, who went on to record to say that he had heard of this name during some of his investigations throughout the years. And so that kind of gave validation to what I was. And people thought I was laughed out of paranormal chat rooms across the country, 12 years ago.
Sure.
You know, when I built this website originally, I began to document the stories, and I began to research it, and I'm a pretty good researcher, and I was able to uncover some very disturbing mentionings of this particular entity, even in a demonic sense, having found it in various grimoire and demonic encyclopedias, such as Simon de Plancy's Dictionary Infernal, written in various editions in the 19th century. And so when you begin to dig and you begin to validate this stuff, it kind of puts then people really started to look into it. Wait a minute, this guy may not be crazy after all. What the hell's going on here? That's kind of what happened.
Yeah, because
So
I never.
up just a second here. When did you first come into contact with ZoZo? Do you know the year, and how far were you into your experience with the Ouija board? Was it the first time? Was it the second time?
I knew something was up with the name of ZoZo because it was inscribed on the other side of that board, the real menacing looking side.
Gotcha.
And when we began to experiment with the board, let me grab something here. I have a board here. I don't know if you can see this, but
yeah,
we used a cassette deal. This is a kind of a real plancher, but we used a cassette, and I cut a hole out for the centerpiece.
Mm-hmm.
But what was strange is that cassette would move off the table or off the board, and then it would then scoot the whole board off the table.
Really?
And it would often land menacing side up. And it would even say that it preferred to speak to us on the other side, which we didn't like to use that side.
Mm-hmm.
But it got pretty weird. That's when began to speak to this ZoZo thing was, back in 1982, I believe.
okay.
And so there was a period of time, and this was a board that I rescued from a haunting in Las Vegas. It's got incredible erosion on it. It's just really strange. There's some of the boards that I've come across. This has had some serious movement done on it. Not unlike the board that was found underneath the house, that was again surrounded by preserved blackbirds, which I found out later in my research. I found out that in the ancient Basque language, that ZoZo is defined as blackbird or crow.
Oh, really?
And so there definitely seems to be a significant esoteric connection between this particular entity and ravens, crows, the whole corvid family of birds. And then, when we filmed the horror film I Am ZoZo, I was on site and had a strange experience inside that Freemasons temple that the movie's filmed in, parts of it. But I actually filmed a raven that vanished in thin air. It's on my YouTube. If you ever want to look at that, it's still up on my YouTube. And that was actually featured on the TV series Fact or Faked. That was my first exposure to the paranormal as far as, my video of that particular raven. And, it was perched in a tree, and it reminded me that it was making some strange noises that caught my attention, which made me start to film it. And I'll never forget, it kind of sounded like the old Batman series Penguin. It was going wah, 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 like it was laughing at me. Right. I had a strange experience inside this one of the largest Freemasons temples in North America, north of Seattle, in Des Moines, Washington, in Puget Sound. There's this huge, and I believe it's torn down now. And it's a shame because it was an absolutely beautiful place. But it was haunted, and they picked that for a reason. And so I had this very strange experience in the bathroom that was shut down of this facility, which was a part of this Freemasons temple, was an old hospital, and they had apartments, but everybody shared the same bathroom. And so in this bathroom, on each level, on each wing, they had one bathroom that had like 13 stalls in it. Well, I got to wandering around in this temple, and I kind of got lost when I had to use the restroom. So I walked in this bathroom, and I, got a strange feeling when I walked in there. because it didn't have regular stalls. It had pull curtains that were designed, to pull behind you so that you could use the restroom in private.
Right.
I was thinking, man, and it seemed to be functional, but I had a very strange experience in there that left me terrified. Something I could only describe as like an inner organ cramp. Something took me over, and I couldn't get my P's and Q's together, ladies. I was kind of raised a Christian, and so I actually tried to cry out to Jesus, and Jesus wouldn't come out of my mouth. The word George was the only thing that would come out.
Wow.
And so I was able to get past that, but that's when I walked outside of this establishment, and I just needed a break, and I went outside, and I suddenly hear this raven laughing at me. And so anyways, I broke out my cell phone and I recorded that, and it simply vanishes before your very eyes on this video. And I actually sent the SD card to a digital forensic pathologist that the show hired, and they were unable to debunk. There was no pixelation. There was no disturbance of that footage that was filmed on an old BlackBerry cell phone.
Wow.
But there does seem to be a connection, between the two. And so what that connection is, who knows? As we know, ravens are very mysterious animals.
Yes.
Throughout history, they've been used in raven knowledge, the prophecies, the omens and stuff, that not just Indians believed it too. I mean, they had their own beliefs about these ravens. Very intelligent, super intelligent, that could recognize themselves in a mirror. Unlike a lot of 99% of animals. And so I still find it strange that board was found amongst preserved blackbirds. I'll never forget when we dug these, and these were old lightning jars. They had the mechanical tops on them. And I remember it had a strange white chalky substance on these jars of preserved blackbirds. I remember pulling one out, wiping it down with a towel and holding it to the light. And I remember seeing the blood red eyes were still intact. And it was very spooky. And so we often, what the hell did we uncover there? And I've never seen anything like it since, but it does seem to, someone, I believe, was talking to whatever this thing is. And so years later, when I found out that other people, and I've had in my book, the ZoZo Phenomenon is available still on Amazon or wherever books are sold pretty much. I co-authored it with the late, great Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who passed away about a year or two after writing the book with me. We were actually writing a follow-up to that ZoZo Phenomenon when she got sick and had to start canceling appearances, and bless her heart, she's passed. But I miss Rose a lot. She was, an author of over 64 books on the paranormal.
Wow.
And so she was about to explode in media, and she had to turn down a lot of media. She was on some show, about the paranormal witness and everything. And, I miss her. I learned a lot from Rosemary. And so, and then there's been another ZoZo book that's been written, and one of the co-authors, another female co-author, died that wrote that book. So
now with
that's two ZoZo books, two authors have perished. Not saying they're connected, but it is suspicious. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I've been kind of a guy that warns people about the dangers of boards and what the dangers do exist.
Absolutely.
So,
I wonder why we haven't heard much, before. I guess personally, I had never heard of ZoZo until, like I said, watching your episodes and whatnot. But what type of, obviously he's a demon. Do you think he came through previous, back during spiritualism, whenever, of course, did they have boards then, when they used the boards then, or is it just something now that we're hearing about? Has he been around for a while? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, he's obviously been around for a while. Where does he come from? What type of demon is he, and what is he looking to do?
You know, it's been mentioned in so many different periodicals, books, magazines, scientific journals, in many different languages. I had an individual contact me from Tibet that had a ZoZo experience in the mountains of the, Nepal, near a school, to where he said an old man named ZoZo was pushing off students
Oh, okay.
off cliffs, sent me pictures of this school. Now, in this mountainous region, they have schools that are built on the sides of mountaintops,
Right.
And so that got me to digging into some ancient Tibetan demonology. And so the oldest reference of ZoZo comes from the 7th century. That's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in this prophecy, which was it was deciphered by a professor of Asian studies. His name evades me right at the current moment, but he wrote a fantastic journal and probably knew more about the ancient Nepal ways and culture than anybody else, because for years he was over there and experienced the culture firsthand and heard generations of stories handed down. Well, anyway, there was a prophecy that he had uncovered that mentions a king that releases an individual, a human being, from the 9th citadel of copper underneath the earth. And he reluctantly releases this human being in this Tibetan prophecy. Now follow me.
Uh-huh.
The demons of the earth. Now this is supposedly signify and trigger the end of mankind, according to this prophecy, that when this human being is released upon the earth, that all the demons of the earth will join him. And I about fell out of my chair when they said its name was ZoZo.
Oh, wow.
And so
Okay.
in this prophecy, it goes into say that the historical record keeping is not, the passing of time is not necessarily linear, as humans so often are sensitive to or perceive, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It describes a different method of timekeeping, but it does talk about how this ZoZo human being becomes a lord of all demons, and they join together and try to bring forth the end of mankind. And so in this prophecy, again, a demon or a human being that joined, and I thought that was strange because that's one of the only references of ZoZo being human.
Right.
Okay. And so I've found so many connections that it's just absolutely mind-bending. For instance, in the Melanesian language, the term ZoZo is defined as a sleeping, walking spirit. There are many mentionings of a particular tribe that existed in Africa that was responsible for the spreading of Ebola, and they were called the ZoZo people. And they practiced very bizarre scarification rituals. They would drink bodily fluids and blood and that kind of thing. And they wore a mask that they called, just the pronunciation of it, ZO. When they wore this mask, it's supposed to take your last breath. And the shaman of this particular tribe, when someone died, he wanted to wear that mask, and he would inhale their last breath. If he didn't do that, supposedly the spirit of the mask would go inside the person. So there's just mentioning after mentioning after mentioning of this thing. And in early, there's a UFO connection in the early in 1964. No, this was in the 50s. George Edmondson, an early UFO pioneer, began to have Ouija sessions in which he was summoning UFOs. Now, this guy was an early UFO pioneer.
Mhm.
And him and his wife and another couple began to have Ouija sessions, and they summoned something that called itself Zo. And it gave warnings to human beings. This was back in the 50s. It's mentioned in the book, The Saucers Speak by George Williamson, not Edmondson, George Williamson. In 1964, Alan Vaughn was a paranormal researcher. He began to have Ouija, began to experiment with Ouija and began to have contact with something that identified itself only as Z. And that's something that's also, there's many stories of people getting confused, possibly also with Zaza, Z-A-Z-A. And there's been some quite harrowing stories involving that particular, if it is a separate entity or if it's the same one, we really don't know. But there does seem to be the strange mama entity that often surfaces with ZoZo encounters, where they kind of play a tug of war psychologically with the participants. And so, very strange, but it's true.
So ZoZo, Zaza, Mama, is it all the same demon? Is it still ZoZo, or that's where I get super confused?
I mean, some people believe it. I mean, just because I've done a lot of research doesn't mean that everything that I say is the truth, or I call it as I see it. I have no reason to lie. I do have an open mind, but I can't, I let people decide for themselves, and I'm very hesitant to say that I can prove anything or whatever, but these things, I've had some very strange experiences that defy all logic. And again, when I found out that other people were having experiences this, and let me just say, thankfully, that a lot of this stuff's come to a crashing halt after 2020. I do believe that this thing, it was, Rosemary and I were getting emails from people that were having Ouija experiences that sent us emails saying that ZoZo was saying the end of the world was going to be in 2020. And I've got screenshots of tweets and Facebook postings to prove. I was putting posts out there saying we were getting correspondence from people that were very serious about their contact with ZoZo, and it even predicted Donald Trump's presidency in one particular encounter, and said that we might be going to war with either China or Russia. So, we still don't understand the ideomotor effect doesn't explain away at the mechanics of what happens when you put your fingers on a planchette. Now I do believe that there is some ideomotorized action at work, but it doesn't explain how people will often misspell a word that they would never misspell on a board. And that's happened to me several times. The abbreviations that are used in some of I can remember having the sessions would be so incredibly fast that I would lose track of my train of thought. I didn't know what the hell it was saying. People would have to stand above us and record the conversations as they came, Now, that doesn't fall under the whole ideomotorized action deal either. And so, for instance, when guys, I know I talk a lot, but when let's say 4 or 5 people put their hands on a planchette, how is it able to resolve in a micro fraction of a minute, resolve everybody's mind into one coherent spelling sequence? That's not going to happen. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to, are we speaking to something outside of ourselves, or are we speaking to something internal that's either a part of us or that can communicate in our minds? I'm sure you ladies have heard how criminals often claim before or after they commit their heinous acts, they often say that they heard voices in their head.
Yeah.
When you see a radio, when a primitive person, an aborigine or something that doesn't even know what the hell a radio is, when they see a radio and when it turns on, they think that thing's talking. Okay. And so, maybe when we hear, perhaps these demons or entities are able to contact, communicate with us subconsciously. Getting back to one of the questions earlier is you know, is it a demon? Is it an egregore, which is a, you know, similar to the Slender Man, where it's an artificial entity that kind of takes a life of its own.
Right.
This kind of appears to have taken on that. But again, after 2020, things really began to slow down with this phenomenon, and I'm quite glad. Things were getting pretty crazy because it was saying that it was 2020, and then when this COVID-19 came, that's scary shit, you know.
Sure. So I know that demons can sometimes, or at least I've heard that they can sometimes disguise themselves or pretend that they're somebody else by giving you a false name. So do you think that Zozo is its real name, or is that just the name that it's giving you?
Boy, that's the $1 million question right there. I have uncovered research into the letter Z that's quite fascinating. It's only in the last 150 years that it began to be called Z. It was the letter Z was actually eliminated from several languages in antiquity. The Latin scholars eliminated it because the mere pronunciation of the letter itself caused the face to contort in a skull type of, which they called the rictus of death, which was the digging up of a fresh corpse. They associated the letter Z along with Shakespeare and others, King Lear, that associated the letter Z and called it the horse on Z, the evil eschatological letter, the letter of prophecy, the letter of the zigzag. And so why is it it's the least used letter of the human language, or of the English language? And so what we find out in Hebrew, though, is the letter placement. And, you know, in Hebrew, every color has a designated sound as well as a vibration, and numeric vibration. And so when you begin to look at the gematria side of it, and the numerical aspect of Zozo, it becomes, you know, the letter or the number 28, which is associated with the feast of the beast and other things. But there's just a lot of things associated with not only letter Z, but the ZO. And according to Hebrew, the word Oz is a very good word, OZ. However, when you switch those letters around to Zo, it becomes the opposite of that good word and becomes a bad word. Okay. And so, and I've found literature discussing this very thing, as well as an ancient shaman that described ZoZo demons that it would attack his students, that would cause them to rock back and forth. And he called them the demons of the Zo and of the Ma, M-A. Now, how did he know this? You know, and so how did these people from hundreds of years ago, you know, in Italy, an ancient Franciscan Pope described in a big session, or in a big get together, where he described Zozo in a demonic sense, and it was actually in Latin, and it was you know, quite fascinating that Zozo would be brought up in the 1700s as a demon, and then again in the 1800s as a demon in the dictionary Infernal. And so I've found other references to Zozo written in Latin, that's old school Latin, that I can't decipher. I'm not a scholar of Latin, but I know a little bit about it, and it's, you know, there's so many connections that it's just crazy. And so the more I've dug, the more I've found on this, and I think I'm about found all I want to find when it comes to the phenomenon. So
yeah, I'm sure. But so why do you think Zozo is mainly affiliated with the Ouija board? Is it just easier way for him to come through, or is just, I'm not really sure, because
when you find so much evidence of it existing prior to the modern invention of the Ouija, you know, I think that it's just, I think that a lot of people, a lot of backyard paranormal enthusiasts Anybody that wants a paranormal experience, one of the easiest things they can do or grab is a board.
Yeah.
And not just the William Fold or the Parker Brothers boards. I mean, there's millions of other boards that have been manufactured and sold and built and made. And I mean, there's millions and gazillions of them, you know. But it's when the manufacturers such as Hasbro and Brian Goldman, may he rest in peace, I predicted that they were going to make a film about the Ouija board and conduct it in such a manner where it had elements of a horror film, such as The Ring, where on one hand, they say it's just a toy. And on the other hand, they produce a movie that has a lot of scary stuff for kids. And the way it's marketed to children, purples, pastels, you know, these little girly boards, you know, I don't think parents realize, and some have a lot of atheists are cool with all beliefs, but there's a lot of parents that may not give a shit that their daughter's being threatened to be dragged to hell by a demonic force in its descriptions when they communicate. So it's no wonder that fear is such a factor involved, you know, and of course, Hollywood has a lot to do with that. But it's not just The Exorcist that gave the Ouija board a bad reputation, folks. The Ouija board need only look in the mirror to see book after book after book. Even before the Ouija board was invented, people were having sessions on planchets and hand devices, dialettes and planchets of different. And so while that Ouija board was invented in 1891, you know, for 20 years before that, people were still talking to the spirits in different ways.
Right.
And they were coming across very evil spirits during these communication and these seances. So, you know, I mean, I've posted a lot of those in my blog at Darren Evans Paranormal at Gmail, or at if you type in Darren Evans Paranormal, you'll be taken to one of my blogs where I document a lot of this stuff, you know. And I've been accused of making this stuff up as well. I've been tore apart by critics, but I didn't make it up. I simply had my experiences, and I began to figure out other people. And if you go to the topsecret.com or abovesecret.com, one of those, it's on my there's a link to it on my blog site. There's a site, unsolvedmysteries.com, has a particular page where, before I went public with my experiences back in 2008, there were other people sharing their experiences from perhaps a decade before that on that website. And one of them that isn't listed on there was from a Nigerian chat room in 1998, in which a guy was asking questions in Africa. Has anybody come across this ZoZo during Ouija sessions? And then in the film, there's a film in which ZoZo is mentioned in this horror film as the two-headed dog that guards the gates of hell. I have a clip of that on my site as well. And so when you start looking at all these connections that mention this thing as a demon, there's literature, and what's weird is they all seem to be unconnected and disconnected. And that's another strange part of this whole phenomenon, is the way it seamlessly jumps from geographic location. It jumps the language barriers, but in every language and in every instance, pretty much, the term Zeo or ZoZo is very negative and very blasphemous. You got the burning of the Zozobra. You've got the Zo people of Burma. You have all these. I mean, it's just crazy how much negative shit is invested with this term. And so who knows what the hell it really is. But I do believe it to be an embodiment of negativity, if that makes any sense.
Right.
So when you were communicating with it the first time through the Ouija board and you were done with your session, did you close that session out properly? And if so, how was it that the ZoZo Demon remained?
There was many times, we didn't close them properly. There was many times we tried to, but it was always pretend to be other people, and it would do so with an intellectualism it could read minds, and it would mess with you to the point psychologically where it would scare the shit out of you. It knew when women were on their cycle,
Wow.
things like that. We took it over to my one of my best friends, and his wife did not believe in demons, did not believe in the spirit world at all. We took it over there and we messed around on a board for perhaps 30 minutes to an hour. All it would spell was window.
Window.
I kept looking at the window, like, what's going on here? And so his wife went to the kitchen. She went to go get us some drinks, and when we heard the glass break, and she screamed and said somebody was looking inside of the window at her, that understood why it was saying window, and we bolted out the door and chased this bizarre looking guy all the way 2-3 blocks away, and did not even know that this was that Tulsa Behavior Science Facility was there. They don't advertise it as being there, but it's a place where they have perhaps 20 to 30 mental patients. One of them had escaped and was for whatever reason, walked to a house 2 or 3 blocks away and started peeking in the kitchen window. And so, we've chased this guy, and the cops were already at the facility. He'd already been mentioned as missing, and he'd already run back in there. He was scared because we were chasing him. He was fast, big old tall bald-headed guy, freaky looking dude, man. Well, when the cops went in there and interviewed him, they came back out and they said, well, that was strange. And I said, well, what did he say? Because we were out of breath, and the cops were like trying to calm us down and shit. And so, but I'll never forget that cop said that the cop asked him why he did what he did. And he said, the devil made him do it.
Oh, we've heard that before.
I just watched that movie the other day.
I know.
So, but I still, I used to be pretty obsessed with this whole deal. And it's, I had to have some therapy because I was getting death threats. I was getting crazy stalkers, and so I'm glad things have calmed down and I've got a normal life. I don't know how I've managed to achieve that. I'm still very interested in in paranormal research. And I don't know if you guys have seen the Norman episode on the show A Haunting. They called me in to do an investigation on a haunted doll. And very strange things happened.
The
And
Norman episode, you said?
Yeah, it's called Norman the Haunted Doll.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a really cool episode. Check it out. And I just made, I'm kind of a guitar freak, but I just made this on a vintage Yamaha guitar.
That's so cool.
Awesome.
On the guitar. And so, yeah.
Shame I can't play the guitar. I'd want one.
I thought that was kind of cool. You don't see that too often.
No.
That's awesome.
But ladies, it's been great. But I tell you, I do encourage anybody that's interested in that phenomenon to pick up the book, the ZoZo Phenomenon, because we did a lot of research, and it's just crazy, all the different connections, and a lot of people share their stories with us, and we got permission to share a bunch of them, and it's in the book too. And so, it's what it is. I don't have near as many people that claim to be haunted by it or affecting them nearly as much as it was even, a few years ago. And so
that's interesting.
That's a good thing, ladies.
And do you know, I know you mentioned about the 2020 just supposed to be the end of humanity or whatever. Is that why you think ZoZo's not messing with people as much? You said it kind of calmed down since 2020.
I just can't help but think it had something to do with its whole surfacing,
Right.
And so I really don't think it was intended. I mean, if we were to believe that was its real name, that it would actually, we'd have to turn our back on the whole Catholic demonology philosophy period, because they believe that, and for good reason, in exorcisms, they use its name against it. But, the weird thing about the ZoZo phenomena, it wants you to say its name.
Exactly.
And it says there's a power in that name. It's what it told me. And so, and again, there seems to be some kind of strange power when it comes to the letter Z, combining it with other words. Now, you believe that if we take that with a grain of salt, because I don't believe everybody that I named my son Zach with the letter Z. So I don't think people are haunted, but I do know that I was able to decide, uncover some startling insurance statistics that say people with the letter Z in their license plate are much more susceptible to fatal vehicle accidents.
Really?
Strange.
My
Yep.
son's name is Zach too, so we don't say that. We won't say anything has to do with that.
No, but the letter Z is fascinating. It was pronounced Izzard for so long, and it just has a very fascinating history.
Yeah.
But it does seem to have, it's a buzzword Z. It has such a kind of a power. The letter Z is a scepter. It's got great power in the Babylonian times, Gregorian, it seems to have its own kind of power in a way. It's kind of strange. The Z glyphs, the Mayan Z glyphs, are the only ones that have not been deciphered. So I don't know, but it's fascinating stuff, I was summoning UFOs out in Nevada a couple of years ago. Fox 23 News came out. Now, can you imagine the looks I was getting trying to summon UFOs using a Ouija board? And I had a shaman that blessed us. So we did, we took some preparatory actions before going into that deal, but that was crazy. We actually was on, got a lot of news coverage on that. Me and the guys that were involved, Joshua Warren and David Weatherly, two fantastic power players in the paranormal, and so it's fun to. I've been pretty lucky to have met the people that I've met in the paranormal field. I've met a lot of celebrities in the field that all have their niche, all have the things that they do. It's a cool field. Being on Ghost Adventures several times and working with them guys and seeing how they do things and how they're able to, go about, run a tight ship, and the whole running gun filming aspect works. They've set a niche, they've set the bar high in that field. And so it's always fun to see what they got going on. It's very controversial, the difference between, an actual investigation and what might be considered entertainment. And so there's a fine line between those two, but I've been fortunate. I've been involved in a lot of different locations and investigations with several different teams, and have been around the block for the last decade. So it's nice to experience the recognition that I've gotten from a demon, I guess. And so
Yeah.
but again, it's not without some degree of guilt for being the guy that's had to basically expose it, and so am I going to pay a price for that? I hope not. I hope I'm forgiven. But because if it wasn't for me, somebody else would have exposed it. It would have came out eventually anyway, I think. And so, but it is what it is, and it remains a controversial topic, Ouija boards, period.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want to group together. They want to put the board as the same categories, ghost boxes and electrical equipment. And it's amazing the majority of people that think they're one and the same, and I don't think they are.
I would agree with that.
I think that when you're giving out an invitation, biologically interfacing with the spirit world, as opposed to letting an electronic gizmo do its thing, we have electronal discharges in our bodies as well. And so I think we're doing two different things when you're doing a Ouija board as opposed to a spirit box. But then again, that's just my opinion. What do I know?
No, I kind of agree with you. There's a whole different between hands-on and, like you said, having something to communicate through, than just people just think with the Ouija board, you were just saying earlier about, say anybody could pick one up. We have children that are playing with them. I always thought it was more about intention, but it sounds like from what you're saying, basically you can just try to communicate with something and you don't know what you're going to get. So what would you really suggest for like my children? When they were young, I bought one. They were out on the trampoline, they were playing, nothing happened. And I always felt that it was more about intention, what you were trying, if you're thought process and putting all your energy into wanting to actually contact somebody, then you open up that portal, open up that communication, and there you go. So is it about intention, or just, anybody can sit down and, be playing
Well,
around?
there's a thing that science could actually describes it can be quite dangerous, called self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's basically when you plant a seed that something's going to happen in the future, does that affect the outcome? And I think it does, and it's been proven that it does. And so regardless of your stance on the boards, whether we're messing with something that internal or external, if you're a responsible person, you have to admit that there are certain dangers involved in the revealing of information to an individual who may not be prepared for that information psychologically, such as a child, a teenager, or even an adult that isn't prepared and might hear something. Especially, I always warn people never to ask something pertaining to future events or death.
Yeah.
Because it can be, be careful what you wish for. These things can happen. I've seen it happen. And thank God, it said I was going to be stabbed one time. It said I was going to lose my life in a stabbing. Well, I got stabbed. I've got a huge scar right there.
Ooh.
And I nearly lost my life. So don't think that wasn't in the back of my mind as I'm laying in a pool of blood after being stabbed by a woman that was using a Ouija board behind my back. So there's an element of danger involved when you begin to communicate with something that knows more about you than you do, something that knows where hidden objects are, something that knows middle names of people and dates of birth that we don't know. When it starts revealing that information, that can be a predeterminant of what you're actually speaking to, could be a couple levels higher than what you bargained for, which could be the result of demonic attachment. And I hate to say the word demonic, but I mean, that's what this thing is.
Right.
And, again, the word demon is just a label that we use to describe something that we don't understand. And so regardless of what label you use, these things happen. And people have these experiences, and I get attacked by people. Oh, it's all bullshit. Nobody, blah, blah, blah. Well, it may be bullshit to you, but until you have a paranormal experience, you're going to be a skeptic naturally.
Right.
And so I just recommend that people that do, if you're going to do a board, to make sure you use a really, protect yourself, use whatever belief system that you have and implement that belief system into your intent. Make sure you have the proper intent. Make sure you close it correctly. Don't be like I did on Ghost Adventures when the producers told us to get out of that mansion. Suddenly we had to go, and we didn't close the damn thing right.
I saw that.
I nearly died 3 days after that of pneumonia, a sudden onset of pneumonia and blood sepsis. And so that was the last time I was on Ghost Adventures. I don't know that they'll ever have me back. I tell it like it is. We didn't close the session properly. And so I do recommend it, even if it's for your own placebo benefit, that you have some type of closing ritual and prayer or whatever, and not to take it too seriously. Don't ask questions about death and future events, because it plants those seeds of self-fulfilling prophecy. And just tell people be careful,
Yeah.
and
Nice.
be skeptical of who you're speaking with, because it can reveal itself to be something that you may not want to deal with.
Right.
Yeah, because once you get that thought in your mind, it's like it's back there. I'm going to die. 2 years from now. You can actually put it out in the universe, and it actually, like I said, self-fulfilling. So I definitely believe. Don't want to know. Don't tell me when I'm going to die. What's coming up in the future? Anything. I don't want to know. Just let it out.
Well, I do believe in the different laws of attraction, that like is definitely drawn unto itself. And I think that when we start messing with negative associations, powers, and principles, that we reflect and attract that same negativity in our lives. And so regardless of what our belief system is, I think if we're wholesome people and we believe in good and we have morals and we don't want to hurt people, we want to do what's right. I think that's, has a lot to do with what happens to us as individuals, especially on a board. And some people have a lot of more sensitivity. For instance, you may be a light trance medium and not know it, but you probably do know it. And those people that have a heightened sensitivity to these spirits and energies, they can go into these things and they can become quite taken over easily by these deceptive spirits. Okay.
Yeah.
And so if you're empathic, if you know, deep empaths and people with these types of gifts have considerable more sensitivity to the spirit world and can bring these things out much with more emphasis and power than people that may just have been doing it just, you know, just to try to see, to scare their best friend or whatever. And they're, you know, and so it's just, I just tell people to be careful and you know, and to be responsible, because there's way too many people catching them on fire, drinking, doing drugs with them, that kind of stuff. And, you know, and it's just, it's not something that can, you know, that you need to do. And so I just tell people to be careful, and not all sessions are going to produce scary, dramatic, exorcist type scenarios.
Mhm.
But how many good stories have you heard
Not
when it comes to Ouija?
None.
You know, in today's culture, today's society, you're having a lot more positive people that are basically trying to prove that the Ouija board is not something that should be feared or something that should be, you know, I just let people make their own minds up, you know.
right.
I encourage people to make up their own minds and use their own level-headedness and going into an experience and see what happens. And then, you know, because something's going to happen usually. But yeah, I definitely, I'm a good guy. I'm not a devil worshiper, and you know, I've been accused of all those things, but I try to help people, and you know, I try to do the right thing. And so I think that part of that is warning people to be careful when it comes to boards.
Gotcha.
Well, Darren, is there anything else you would like to add that we didn't talk about tonight? Anything you would like to leave our listeners with?
Nope, you guys did a wonderful job, and thank you for having me on. And I hope that everybody has a good evening.
And thank you so much, Darren, for agreeing to sit down with us. And you have really filled us in on a lot more than what I knew about the ZoZo. So, but thank you so much for agreeing to sit down. It's so nice to finally meet you.
You're welcome, ladies. Take care and God bless. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you.
So tune in next time as we discuss the legend of Indrid Cold.
Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite streaming service. I'm Sydney Miller,